We're off to outer space. We're leaving Mother Earth to save the human race. Our star blazers, searching for a distant star, heading off to Iskandar, leaving all we love behind. Who knows what dangers we'll find? We must be strong and brave. Our home we've got to save. If we don't, in just 1 year, Mother Earth will disappear. Fighting with the Gamelons, we won't stop until we've won. Then we'll return, and when we arrive, the Earth will survive with our star blazers.
Hi, everybody, and welcome once again to GeekFest Rants. My name is Carlos Perron, and joining me here I have James. Say hello, James.
Hello, hello. Or konnichiwa.
Well, today we are going to be approaching a subject that we haven't really touched, I think, ever, in a way. This is something that I guess you could call it a genre. It's definitely a genre when it comes to a lot of the type of stuff we're into. A lot of it dips into science fiction. Some of it even, I guess, borders into horror, drama, heavy drama and stuff like that, even comedy. What we're talking about here is anime. The traditional Japanese anime that, you have to kind of like search a little deeper than your average mainstream type of stuff to get to. It is gigantic, obviously, in Asia, but if you go to conventions, you're going to see that there's a huge anime contingency of people there, not only dressed up as those characters, but merchandise. There's tons of merchandise, I'm not talking about just videos and DVDs, but toys and art and all that kind of stuff. So what we're going to try to do today is do a kind of like a basic, what is anime all about and what are some of the big, kind of landmark things that if you want to approach anime from a newbie kind of angle, here's a couple of places you should go and start with, because this will give you a kind of like a taste. It's like a sampler platter, if you will, of what anime is all about. So, James, why don't you start off with some of your favorites?
Well, like a lot of the things that we've talked about, it all spawned from the sci-fi of the 70s, specifically Star Wars or Star Trek. And, Logan's Run, things like that. Eventually, things like Black Hole, Tron, And what brought me to anime, per se, was a show called Star Blazers. And Star Blazers came to America based on a reworking of a show called Space Battleship Yamato. And a lot of people have seen the Space Battleship Yamato, and they kind of have an idea of what it is, but they don't really know where it came from. And what it was a 1974 anime series in Japan. And it basically was a movie that spawned many sequels into the 80s, as well as a TV version, even in Japan. And when it came to, Star Wars came out, everybody was looking for a property or something that could tie into sci-fi. So everybody went to the well. What do they have? What can they get? And Space Battleship Yamato became Star Blazers. And this show was aired on, I think it was very obscure. It's very hard for me to find in a sense. It was on a Philadelphia. I lived in South Jersey. So I had New York channels and Philadelphia channels. It was on a Philadelphia. At the time, we didn't have like Fox and things like that. They were basically UHF channels. And it was a Philadelphia channel. I found it after school, and everybody started watching it, friends that I had and some teachers, because it was a serial, basically. It started... Each episode, we have, another episode. We have a certain amount of time to get to the end. And I just have to tell you, it was so great, and you didn't want it to end. It just, oh my God, what's going to happen now? And obviously there's an end, but It's a journey to and back through this story. And the funny thing is, I don't think I was the only one watching it, because there's a lot of themes in it that have appeared in other sci-fi that we're all fans of. There's some character names that definitely show up in Star Trek: The Next Generation. Now, I can't swear to it, but there's a minor character by the name of Geordi. Now, where have we heard that name, Carlos?
Well, no kidding. But are these names that are translated, or these are the Japanese names also?
I guess it was the Japanese names, but it showed up in the English translation as well. Then there was a holodeck. Where have we heard of that, Carlos?
Boy, here we go.
So I'm not going to get into that because I'm not accusing anybody of any thievery. That's not the point of this show. But I'm just saying there's a lot of things that showed up from a lot of this Japanese animation that eventually ended up in things a lot of people in America know and love.
Well, something even that old, as you're talking about, one of the early ones that you remember, how would you say they were different than traditional American or more like Western animation that we're used to? What made them different?
Well, the way the characters are drawn specifically have ironically, a very round eye. The ladies were very slim and sexy looking. The men all seemed to be generally, man looking. There was nothing crazy about that, but the ladies were always very sexy, long flowing hair, things like that. In this one in particular, it was about this battleship Yamato that had been wrecked during World War II, that hundreds of years later, the planet Earth is under attack by this alien race, and it's being made inhabitable, and there's nuclear radiation type of stuff, so on and so forth. So the people move underground. In the meantime, they basically retake the ship from below and turn it into a space battleship, a special engine that they get information from another alien people, and a special weapon called the wave motion gun. The whole thing sounds a little crazy, but it's not. It's so cool, and it's basically a battleship, a World War II-looking battleship with huge guns and a major laser-type cannon in the front of it. Planes, space planes, kind of like, not quite X-Wings, but kind of like, a squadron of planes. And the aliens were called Gamelons, or that was the American name, and they had like a bluish green color to their skin, and the whole thing just really hit me, and it was so fantastic, and I just ate it up. So there wound up being a sequel on TV. There was a second mission, let's say, and I think they went like 26 episodes. So
these were like what, half-hour episodes?
Yeah, so it was a decent run. 5 days a week. I don't know, what's that come to, like maybe 2 months or so, give or take. Then the second one, oh my God, there's more, thank God. Well, they made a third one that I eventually got in a box set of VHS, but many of the voices changed, the American voice actors. It just wasn't up to par, and it's like anything. If your characters are gone, and you're even in a cartoon when they change Barney Rubble or they change, Bugs Bunny's voice a little bit or something, you notice it as a kid or as an adult. So it kind of lost a little something in that third version, but there were films in Japan that we didn't get that were considered sequels to the original.
Oh.
And it just went on, and it was fantastic. And there's at least 5 or 6 of them, and you can find them. Now I think they're out on DVD. They might even be out in Blu-ray.
Now, are these not only this one that we're talking about, but the future ones we're going to be talking about a little later? I know that when we in the past talked about Godzilla, for example, that the message of Godzilla, yes, it's a monster movie, but it's really about, the horrors of nuclear, war and nuclear contamination. Do these have any kind of unifying theme, any kind of post-World War II, invading forces type of film?
Yeah. It's more like, believe it or not, even though the Japanese Empire was aligned with the Nazis during World War II, this enemy seems very German/Nazi-ish. Mm-hmm. And I would say that the crew, even though they were United Earth type of thing, it was not a denominational thing. There is a way of like how the Japanese maybe, are trying to regain their glory. The proud ship Yamato is back. It was sunk. We have a great leader who's an older man type of thing who may have been in a war, kind of like World War II, who can, the Captain Avatar was his name in America. And the younger crew who's, proud to serve under him, things like that. So I'm sure those themes all came in. And there is the way we watch it versus how a Japanese audience would watch it, a different feeling. And I'll get to it later, but there was even a movie just a couple years ago that I'm going to talk about, and I'm rooting basically for the characters to succeed, but I'm watching it as an American. It's a Japanese guy who's the hero and trying to win World War II basically by his inventions and his... It's just weird. And I was trying to say to a friend who encouraged me to watch it, it's wow, imagine if you're a Japanese audience watching this, how you feel, because the ending of that war was a little different for them, sadly. And now, it's like, it's bittersweet. Even though the characters kind of succeeded, they failed.
You kind of rewrite history through science fiction.
For us, I'm still coming at from the American point of view where the Americans won, so we really didn't lose anything, but I felt empty at the end because I was rooting for that guy in the context of this story. So anyway, there are messages.
Okay.
As far as Yamato, they tried to make a sequel to the original series, and it was basically going to take place years later. But there wound up being some legal problems between the creators and some of the people who thought they had the rights to it.
Jeez.
And so it only lasted like 2 or 3 episodes, something like that. You can find them, but it's very hard because there was a lot of legal wrangling and it affected a lot of people. So they kind of been pulled. And I don't know if it would have had as much cachet had they finished the whole thing, because it just didn't seem as strong. But later, years later, in 2010, they made a live-action movie that I have seen, and I'm not sure if you have, but you knew it existed because of my talking about it.
Yeah.
The spirit and the look and the feel of the cartoon was strong in the live action, and very rarely does that happen. But I felt, as a fan, that it stood tall because it was really well made. And now in the past couple of years, they've remade it again. But what they did was they went back to the anime and they took the original storyline and they have been releasing it, I guess, in sections every few months for the past couple years.
Okay.
And I got to see it this year. It was very tough to get in America.
Really?
It was in the Japanese. And a lot of this, I have to tell you, a lot of this is in the original Japanese. And I wound up learning a little bit of Japanese from watching these, because sometimes you pick up things. As you coming here, you'd watch movies and you'd learn English, you told me once, or
That's
some of it. So when you watch foreign films, you do definitely pick up stuff after a while if you watch enough of them. And I started to pick up some Japanese, and I tried to learn some Japanese from one of these language on tape series. And it may have helped or not, I don't know, but I actually had no problem figuring out the ones that had no subtitles and no English. And so it's pretty strong still. There's a resurgence. People know it now. Some people go back to the original to try to learn it, and some people are just happy with the new one.
Well, where else can we go to get some basics?
Well, around the same time, like I said, there was another series in America called Battle of the Planets, which came from Gatchaman.
Yeah, I remember that one, yes.
And that has had a couple of rebirths in the past few years. But the Battle of the Planets version added... I don't know if the word esoteric translates for Japanese, but it was very esoteric when you'd watch it. Because unlike Battle of the Planets, which was basically good guys, bad guys, battling ships, heroes, villains, so on, the Battle of the Planets had this weird feeling to it. And it was basically about a group of young, not really military people who were picked for their skills or their flight ability or their computer skills type of stuff, formed a team. They flew this awesome ship called the Phoenix, but was basically several different components made up the ship, and then the ship had a mode that turned it fiery for really tough situations, let's say. They were basically led by a United Nations type group. Their base was undersea in the American version, and they coincidentally had a robot running it called 7 Zark 7, which, if you watched it, he was basically R2-D2 with a witty personality and, speaking English. So that's what drew me to it. Is like, this guy's R2-D2. And so I'm watching this now. But the funny thing is that a lot of people have talked about it over the years. I remember in college we even talked about it. There was some weirdness going on. And as I've gotten older, I've tried to look back to see if it was legitimate or not. And the main villain was a transgendered person. Now,
yeah.
You say, who cares? That's okay, But this is from back in the 70s.
Didn't they have like lipstick, but it was a guy or something like that? And
yeah, and I read on it, and there's legitimacy to it being a transgendered person even back then. And I don't know who came up with that. I have no idea. I haven't been able to figure it out. But his name is Zoltar in America. And when you look at him, very feminine features, lips like a lady. The body, it's hard to tell because they're wearing a cape and a mask and a cowl like Batman and stuff. So you say, okay, well, this could be just very, David Bowie,
Exactly.
And it was the 70s. But like I said, I swear when I looked on and I read it, there was an element of legitimacy to that character may have been a woman being a man. Being a woman, I don't really know, and I didn't care because he was just a bad guy to me.
And from what I remember, there was also, again, that made it different than the previous one we talked about. There was also like a lot of hand-to-hand combat, acrobatics. It almost had like a Power Ranger-y type of vibe to it.
Well, exactly. When I saw Power Rangers, I thought, well, this is a ripoff of something I've seen, even though it's kind of not.
Martial arts type of stuff,
These characters, like there was a heavy-set guy who was basically the pilot, and he stayed kind of in the ship. But they'd wear these outfits, basically like jeans and T-shirts and stuff like that. But then when they transferred into the team, they would have a very bird-oriented type of look. There were two guys who were kind of like these good-looking, heroes like Starbuck and Apollo or Han and Luke or somebody. There was a girl character who's like I said, very sexy anime girl. A younger... I've noticed that they tend to work in on some of these, a younger kid type of character, and this one, I'm not sure how it was in the Japanese version because I found it hard for me to find the whole series in Japan. I found some of the newer versions, and I really can't tell what the character was like there. But he had this weird, like kind of talking. His name was Kiop or something, and it was. He didn't really speak. He just had this kind of weird, language of sounds.
Like a speed racery type of weird communication monkey thing or something.
Yeah, maybe something. I don't want to go that far to say he's a monkey, but he definitely was a weird kid type of character. And then, of course, like I said, their leaders were like the typical, UN type, president type of guy. But it was really cool. And there was an ending. At some point, they do get the bad guy, and that's when they kind of like unmask him, and there's this flowing long hair, and it kind of ends. And so, hey, it hooked me. I didn't think anything of it, but I just knew there was something odd. It's like, it's something different. It's not bad. It's not good. It just was different.
This one I definitely remember a little bit. I remember catching it on the afternoons, and it's like, what the heck is this? Yeah. It's weird. It's different.
So now this is probably airing in America probably as deep into the middle 80s. And by the later 80s, we had the Star Wars series. We have all kinds of science fiction. It's gone crazy in the 80s. Aliens, all that. Then we had Blade Runner, of course, in the early 80s. Well, a very, very, I don't even want to call it inspirational. It was a very groundbreaking anime movie. It was called Akira. Now, a lot of people have heard Akira. I think most people probably heard the name, maybe know a little bit about it who are into science fiction. But it was very post-World War III, dystopian, Blade Runner-ish, mega city, fighting, things like that.
Yeah, a lot of retrofitting, just like Blade Runner.
Cyberpunk was... Now, a lot of people think Blade Runner kind of created cyberpunk, but the name didn't really come... I think
that's the William Gibson stuff.
Yeah, but it has that vibe, and it was very, very cool. And you'd get to see it every now and then, like on a HBO or late night, or you could rent it from a video store. And I remember watching it the first time, and in the Japanese, I think it had subtitles. I don't feel like it had been a translated one. I'm sure there's been translated ones by now, and just very dark and cool. It's just the word cool I think I could use for it. And
it just looked beautiful. And what I remember is that towards the end, it kind of does like the third act, they really go nutty nuts in terms of, wow, where are we going here?
Yeah. It just was very groundbreaking for Americans in terms of anime. Anime was around a long time in Japan, but that kind of kicked open the door for a lot of Americans to get into it more heavily.
Yeah.
And I'm sure it was what a lot of our audience and what a lot of people will say got them into anime if they do indeed like anime.
And it's also, I believe, like we mentioned a little earlier, this one was definitely a message movie having to do, again, with the results of World War II and the nuclear contamination and stuff like that. It had a lot to do with that, I believe.
But you can just, when you watch it, like Neo Tokyo and stuff.
Oh, it's beautiful.
I would really love to see it now in in HD.
Yeah.
In Blu-ray, let's say.
They always threaten to make a live version of it, and it hasn't happened
there's
yet.
a live version in the making that's recently been shut down for, I just don't really know why. They were working on a live. They were pretty close, I think.
Keanu Reeves was attached to making it once. I don't know if it's his last attempt, but every now and then it kind of pops up and it goes away.
Yeah, well, right now there's no progress. It's basically on nuclear hold.
Yeah,
whatever.
No kidding.
You know,
very appropriate.
Yeah.
I remember I used to love the motorcycle the guy would ride in. It was such a cool vehicle.
I think a lot of people in America got into the racing bike culture of the Japanese bikes, probably because of that movie, because it did have an element of, really, badass type of, if you get a bike like that, you're going to be cool like him, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
Around the same time, I mean, there's a ton of other things that people probably have come across over the year. You've got Astro Boy, you've got Avatar: The Last Airbender. That's something that they tried to make a movie of, I think.
M. Night Shyamalan.
Yeah, I heard it wasn't terrible. I didn't get into it. Maybe I'd like to check it out one day. I heard it wasn't terrible. It just wasn't good. Another thing was Dragon Ball Z. I lived in Hong Kong, and the kids were crazy about Dragon Ball Z. I was surprised it took a while to get here. It didn't get to here till maybe the late 90s, early 2000s, but it was huge. Like I said, I mentioned Astro Boy is pretty big. There's a couple other ones that people seem to get crazy about, and it's Ghost in the Shell.
Uh-huh.
I know that's something we talked about a couple episodes ago, how...
that's another one they were saying they were going to make a movie out of recently.
You said Scarlett Johansson was trying to work on that or something. These are very tough because there's a lot more going on in them than people think, and they think, all right, we got this. We can turn it into a movie. And there's more to it. It's kind of, it's kind of tough. There's Oh My Goddess, which was a big one. And then there was another one around the same time as Star Blazers and Battle of the Planets, but it wasn't as accessible, but it's actually cooler in a lot of ways. And it's called Captain Harlock. And it's basically a pirate ship. Imagine a really dark Pirates of the Caribbean in space.
Okay.
And this Captain Harlock is done by the same studio. It's almost like the cousin of Star Blazers.
Oh.
And it's this awesome, I just unbelievably cool pirate ship. And his outfit, and he's got this cool-looking military but pirate kind of theme to it. And I really was never able to find it completely. It showed up sometimes like at late at night, kind of like a heavy metal movie would on HBO back in the 80s and stuff. You would try to find it and try to understand it. It was mentioned in Starlog a lot, but not really any way for you to watch it. And back then we didn't have the internet. Well, finally, now I've been able to rewatch it, and I've been able to watch the movie they made on it. They made an animated movie, where Star Blazers made a live action movie. They made a bigger budget animated movie, but it came across like they were live. You know what I'm saying? You know, you've seen that look? Well, it was pretty well done and pretty hardcore. And it's on Netflix and stuff. People can find it out there. I hope people check it out. But Captain Harlock just had like a darker edge to him. So these are all like little things I'd like people to just try to look for.
Okay.
If, there's a lot of weird stuff. On the happier side, and some things that maybe even your daughter has checked out or younger people have seen, there's Studio Ghibli, which is a huge, it's almost like, how the studio, what's the Godzilla studio?
Toho?
It's like, it's so well respected in animation, just like that's respected for Godzilla for all these years. And the main director, he's a director probably as influential as Kurosawa was for his movies, Hayao Miyazaki. And this guy is an older man now, but this guy has made some of the most beautiful movies, even though they're anime.
And these movies are the ones that sometimes we see nominated for best.
Oh, they get nominated for Academy Awards. They get nominated for Golden Bears.
Or foreign films. Yeah,
these are top-notch stuff, and a lot of people don't even realize what it is. For instance, in the 80s, there was a movie in the theater called My Neighbor Totoro, and it was this kind of weird movie with this big, fluffy cat-looking. It had this cat imagery. He looked like a cat, but he was more. The Totoros were more these fluffy woods creatures, forest creatures, and some of them were big and fluffy, and some of them were small and scampy, and there's this cat bus, and I just remember the cat bus, like people got on the bus and the cat had this weird sound. And I saw it in the theater in probably like the late 80s. It was reviewed by Siskel and Ebert as one of their most beautiful movies that they were so impressed with. And, it came and went, and people who know animation and cartoons and stuff probably dug it. But, they didn't really, I don't think they sold it well in America. I think they tried, but I think American kids were still trying to eat up the kind of animated crap that they had in like the post-good Disney stuff in the 80s, remember, before they got big again?
Yeah.
And so it was getting a little bit difficult to sell some of this stuff, but they were trying. Well, anyway, these movies, he's made some of the most beautiful movies. You've got stuff like Ponyo. You've heard of that. You've
my daughter
heard
watched that one, yep.
Princess Mononoke.
Yeah.
And
yep.
again, another beautiful movie. But the most recent one, which sadly might be his, swan song, is The Wind Rises. And that's the one I was talking about, that watching it as an American with the fact that it was the Japanese sensibilities, it's a beautiful story about a guy who he wants to create and make airplanes. And eventually he is the guy who creates the most fantastic fighter plane, which turned out to be the Japanese Zero. And the various different things that go in, and his dreams that he gets inspiration from, talking to the Italian airplane designer of the past, and the look, just the whole thing. I just wish people, it's almost a fantastic biography, historical movie, because it's based on a real person. And by the end, you're like, they lost the war, but this turned out to be something that everybody wanted to copy in design and in style, and the Americans eventually copied some of the aspects of it too. So it was very inspirational to me.
Right, and these are a different tone, obviously, than the ones we talked about earlier that are more for teenage, like, boys. This is more family and adult type of themes.
Yeah, and this one, an Oscar movie, and it's not some junk. And the director, he's in his middle 70s, and I've heard that he's going to retire, and that might be his last one.
Wow.
And it's just sad that, when somebody is so talented, like, you never want a guy, you never want a Spielberg to say he's retiring. You're always hoping he'll put something together that will be as great, and I'm sure he will. You know what I mean? There are people who are just that talented, and he's up there. He's definitely up there, and I wish more people would try to. I just wish more people would try to check it out. The final thing I want to mention, and certainly not the last, anime. I mean, there's so many different genres. There's the sci-fi stuff that we talk about, but there's the type that are more kiddie version. There are type that are very adult, and hentai. You might have heard those names, and very more sexual. That's not quite my cup of tea, but you will definitely see that kind. If you go to any comic shop, you will definitely see that imagery. Anytime you see those really sexy girls with like hardly any clothes on, and of the Japanese anime style, and as you said, in some of these conventions and Comic-Cons, there are always guys and girls dressing up as these characters, and some of them, like I said, are very sexual. And we talked about some of the stuff, like some of these girls will show up and people will be like grabbing their butts or things like that, and how we said that's so offensive that you would go to a show where everybody can respond as they want to be, and then have some kind of crap like that going on. But this year I was compelled, I'd always heard the name, and I was compelled to finally watch it. Somebody gave me their definitive box set, and it's called Cowboy Bebop. And I've got to tell you, it almost changed my life like Star Wars did. And I've watched a lot of anime. This was just so good. It's basically, I'll explain it, it's basically space bounty hunters. And where have we heard that before, Carlos? and so, all right, I'm thinking, well, geez, maybe it's like that. Is it like
it's Star Wars meets Miami Vice.
Yeah, is it Bosk and Dengar and Boba Fett hanging out? Or is it, no, it is, you're right. It's Star Wars meets Miami Vice in a lot of ways. and it's I didn't even come up with that. That's funny you mentioned it that way. I didn't even think I loved it, maybe because it had the Miami Vice.
Well, the way they dressed, I remember. It's like, wow, it reminds me a little bit of Miami Vice.
Well, Spike Spiegel is probably one of the coolest characters in any format. He just happens to be an anime. You've got Jet Black. You've got...
Well, it's got that Western thing going, that Firefly type of thing that I'm sure Whedon kind of stole from them.
Yeah, well, I think there's a lot of stealing lately from a lot of different genres, and I don't know if it's necessarily bad. if it comes out like Cowboy Bebop, then I'm okay with it. And you've got Faye Valentine, who kind of starts out almost like a bad guy, and Edward. Now, Edward and Ein is the dog, Edward is the girl, but they don't even know it's a girl at first because it's this crazy kid character, like I said, that is inherent in a lot of anime. And these are just some of the coolest characters, and they're in this spaceship, and it's basically another situation where, imagine the space warp from... Geez, I don't even know. It's not like a warp per se like Star Wars' warp, but something happened to the Earth. It caused a lot of chaos on the Earth in terms of the environment, and even parts of it were maybe unlivable. So there's a lot going on Mars, and there's a lot going on in the rest of the solar system per se that's very similar to places on Earth.
Okay.
And these guys are hired for various bounties, and there's this network that basically presents, okay, here's the characters, you get them, you'll get X amount of dollars. But it's got to feel kind of like a Robert Rodriguez is okay, it's got a bit of that in it,
like a little grindhouse in it.
Yeah, and it's just really, it's got the cyberpunk feel, it's got, like I said, a little Star Wars-ish to it, and it's got just a regular down-to-earth, good guys versus bad guys stuff. But it is so planned out. There's no way every bit of it wasn't planned out at first. There was nothing left to chance. And there's a beginning, middle, and an end. And, it's a serious end. And a lot of people are angry that they can't get more of it. But it's almost because there's nowhere to go. It would almost insult what's out there now because of how well it was planned out. And in addition to the beauty of the animation and the beauty of the characters and the way they were written, and this is both in the Japanese version and the American version, which I obviously watched the American version, which is just English voices. It's got this awesome soundtrack, which is a combination of jazz and rock and pop, and thus the whole thing bebop. It's almost like each episode is a certain version of a musical style or a certain jazz style. And I just can't. I watched it, and by the end, it had changed me. I didn't want it to end. And for American fans who try to check it out, you can find it on YouTube, which you can barely see it. It's not as clear as you would like it, but it is available on Amazon and things like that. But one of the characters is well known, and we've talked about this because I've mentioned it to you. Zeb from the new Rebels, Star Wars Rebels on Disney, is Spike. The main character, Spike, which they have completely different voices. Zeb
the
sounds
American
like he's from,
translation, obviously.
Yeah. Zeb sounds like he's from New Zealand, things like that. But I listened to a lot of the extras, and I went online, and I kind of absorbed everything. I mean, I downloaded music. I watched documentaries. The characters in Japan, who were well-respected voice actors, and the sounds, they're almost exactly the same as the American ones. And the people they hired for the American voices, they didn't try to change any of the characters or anything. They really kept to the spirit.
Do you think this is a series that could one day be translated into a film, or it's way too long to make it into a 2-hour presentation, a live-action presentation?
It could definitely be turned into live action, and I think it would blow people away. However, I think it has to be done so well. And this is one that we've also, I think, heard of Keanu Reeves as a possible type of a Spike. Now, I could see him maybe a few years ago. I haven't seen Keanu lately. I think he did that.
He did John Wick, which was amazing.
Okay, no, then I missed John Wick. I haven't seen that yet. But then he did one like 2 years ago. It was kind of like an Asian kind of.
Oh yeah, it was like wow.
It
what
looked
the heck
beautiful,
was it
but it
called?
had no heart apparently.
Like dragons and ghosts and witches and stuff like that. Yeah, 47 Ronin, I think it was called. Yeah, that's what it was.
If he doesn't look too old, and he can still get his young Keanu look, I think he would be fantastic as Spike. He is cool. He's a guy who, has a good look about him. I'd be afraid they'd ruin it, though, and I'd rather people just watch that. Somehow they just keep re-releasing it and getting more people attached to it to watch it. Mm-hmm. I can't say enough about it, and it's gotten me back into anime really hard, and that's why we're doing this episode, because I wanted to talk about it. And I didn't want to just jump in to say, hey, Cowboy Bebop, and throw everything at people. At least they can get an idea where I came from and how they can jump in if people don't really have an idea about what's out there.
Yeah, this definitely gives them plenty to start with. I mean, and again, we're only talking about maybe 6 or 7 or 8 different things we talked about today. There's hundreds of them, but at least if you start with these, it's like getting the main flavors out there, and then you can kind of say, okay, I like this more than that, so you can start kind of navigating towards those type of preferences.
We provided the dim sum of anime today.
A sampler.
You get a little bit of everything.
Right. It's the poo-poo platter.
It's out there. It's out. I mean, there's a lot of stuff out there for people to find. You know, there's a Cartoon Network has the Adult Swim, sometimes throws a lot of these things late at night. With YouTube, you can just type in anime almost, and there's stuff that we haven't even talked about that'll blow you away. But I'm really going to start going back and reading and watching some of this other stuff. And a lot of it comes from the manga, which is the Japanese versions of comic books.
Yeah.
And that's where Big Hero 6 comes from, which just won an Oscar as Best Animated Film this year. Big Hero 6 was based on a manga which Marvel either bought or incorporated or did something, and then it turned it into a Disney-style movie, and it had that kind of anime look to it, even though it wasn't quite. But man, it's out there, and people don't even realize it. So if you happen to like Big Hero 6, you're already halfway ahead of all the other kids.
Yeah, no kidding. Well, listen, I want to thank James, first of all, for joining us today and giving us this Anime 101 lesson. And I want to thank you guys for listening, and hopefully sometime in the future we can continue with different parts to this type of show where we'll give you even more of a sampler of what other things are out there, not only with anime, but other formats that we might not even have talked about yet. So on behalf of everybody here at GeekFest Rants, thank you for listening, and we'll see you here soon. Bye-bye, everybody.
Arigato.
Mr. Roboto.
I thought you liked jazz.
Don't be dense. I started wailing the blues when the doctor whacked my bottom on the day I was born.
A baby hipster. Very cool.
This world's a mess. Economic recession, kids blowing their minds.
Take a look at the Bebop. It's a bigger mess than that.
All right! You are bounty hunter.
Yeah, that's right.
Bounty hunters must be the lowest form of life there is.
You know the first rule of combat? Shoot them before they shoot you.
Brother, get out of my way!
It sounds good to call bounty hunting freelance work.
If you see a stranger, follow him.
Okay, here we go.
All that really means is that we're self-employed.
Jet, do you know that there are 3 things that I particularly hate?
Really?
Kids, animals, and women with attitudes. So tell me, Jet, why do we have all 3 of them neatly gathered in our ship?
I'm the black dog. When I bite, I don't let go.
You know what they say, cowboy. Easy come, easy go.
Look at my eyes, Faye. I'm just watching a bad dream I never wake up from.
Bop, 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 bop.